Good morning, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tim Huxley. I'm Executive Director of the Asia Office of the International Institute for Strategic Studies here in Singapore. IISS-Asia is one of the international offices of the IISS, which has its headquarters in London. I'm extremely pleased to welcome you to this latest event in the IISS Fullerton Lecture Series. As I always mention, the spirit and purpose of this lecture series is to inspire informed and intelligent public debate on matters of international importance from an international perspective. For those of you who are watching the webcast of this Fullerton Lecture remotely, I should say that we're holding this event in the ballroom of the historic Fullerton Hotel in the heart of Singapore's financial district. We are delighted and honored this Monday morning to have with us as our latest Fullerton lecturer the Honourable John Baird, Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Canadian government. I should mention that the IISS has a long-standing historical link with Canada, going back to our founding director, the wartime soldier, journalist, and extremely distinguished academic strategist Alistair Buchan, whose father, the Scottish novelist John Buchan, had been Canada's Governor-General as Lord Tweedsmuir. And more recently, Canada has been a strong participant in our annual Shangri-La Dialogue Summit of Asia-Pacific defense ministers and military chiefs here in Singapore. So it's a particular pleasure to welcome Minister John Baird to the IISS Fullerton Lecture Series today. Mr. Baird has been involved in politics since he was a teenager. He was president of the youth wing of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario in the late 1980s. After graduating in political studies from Queen's University in 1992, he worked as a ministerial staffer and then as a lobbyist in Ottawa. Elected to the Ontario legislature in 1995, he became the province's Minister of Community and Social Services in 1999. A spokesman in the provincial opposition from 2003. In 2004, John Baird endorsed Stephen Harper's bid to lead the newly formed Conservative Party of Canada. In 2005, he resigned from provincial politics to campaign at the federal level for the new party. Elected to Parliament, he soon joined the cabinet as President of the Treasury Board, and from 2007 to 2008 served as Environment Minister, and then as Minister of Transport, and most recently as Minister of Foreign Affairs since 2011. As Foreign Affairs Minister, Mr. Baird has presided over a foreign policy which has displayed a firm commitment to Canada's allies and traditional partners worldwide. Also, he's displayed notable support for human rights internationally. Over the last 3 months or so, for example, Canada has demonstrated its resolve to support Ukraine. It's deployed Air Force units to reinforce NATO allies in Eastern Europe in response to the crisis. Today, though, John Baird will address the theme of Canada's role in Asia and how this important relationship might be expanded in the future. Following his address, he's kindly agreed to respond to questions from our audience here in the ballroom, and then we'll bring the formal session to a close after 40 or 45 minutes. Thank you very much. Over to you, Minister Baird.
Thank you. Well, good morning, and thank you very much for that kind introduction. It's great for me to be here in Singapore with such a distinguished audience. I'd like to thank all of you for deciding to start your that is what is no doubt a very busy week, by listening to me tell you about how great my country is and about how much I know about Asia. I can't promise I won't do those things, but I did want to take this opportunity to really reflect on where I see this region going and how Canada can and will play a part in that important journey. It's a good time for me to do so. I'm in the middle of a journey of my own, a 2 to 3 week tour of East and Southeast Asia. I'll be referencing Asia a lot in this speech this morning, but I'm mostly referring to the Asia Pacific, given the focus of my trip. A trip of this scale gives me the great opportunity to visit a few of the big players. At the same time, as well as Singapore, I've been to Beijing and Tokyo, and I'll be going to Jakarta, Hong Kong, and to Guangzhou. But I've also had time to get to some of the newer, less traditional Canadian partners. It's the first time a Canadian foreign minister has paid a bilateral visit to Mongolia. And I'm the first ministerial visitor from Canada to visit the young country of Timor-Leste. And I will continue by attending a dialogue with ASEAN as part of my second visit to Burma. It is not my first rodeo, as we say in Canada. I'm also the first Canadian foreign minister to have visited every country in the ASEAN region, and I learn primarily through talking to people on these visits. During these travels, I've listened to and learned from fellow foreign ministers, business leaders, community leaders, security experts, activists, and expats. And I'm looking forward to our question and answer session for the same reason here this morning. From these conversations, it's become very clear to me that Canada and Asian nations have more common interests and collective needs than ever before. And this is my message today. Canada is well placed in the Asia-Pacific region. We have strong common interests. But in an increasingly unstable world, we also have a collective need to work together. Let me say at the outset that I'm optimistic about the future of Canada and Asia, not just because of the specific policies and priorities, but because of our very nature. Those who know Canada will know that we are unequivocally a Pacific nation. Asia was and remains an important part of Canada's nation building. Our Asian Canadian demographics are absolutely central to our core identity. They are part and parcel of the basic fabric of our society, and they are one of the great strengths as we commit to deepen partnerships throughout the Asia region. In fact, in demographic terms, you could say that Canada is as much an Asian country as Singapore. We have 5 million Canadians who claim Asian origin, and that's the same size of the entire population here. You could also say that we have the most Asian major city outside of Asia. Almost half, 43% of residents of the great city of Vancouver have Asian heritage. Even in Toronto, our biggest and greatest city, that figure is over 1/3. These are not just numbers, they make a real and incredible difference. The cultural understanding, family links, business ties, and language skills of Canadians of Asian heritage are the rivets and buttresses of the Pacific Bridge. To anyone that says that Canada's geography is a barrier rather than a bridge, the deepened relations with Asia, I would point out that it is quicker to fly from Vancouver to Beijing, Tokyo, or Seoul than it is to fly from Sydney, Australia. For these and many other reasons, Canada already has a deep and growing presence here in Asia. Today, Canada's diplomatic network in Asia is stronger than in any other region. And despite a time of economic cutbacks, it is a presence which continues to grow. In the days ahead, I will open our new embassy in Yangon, with more expansion planned elsewhere in this dynamic region. Our first trade commissioner abroad was dispatched to the region more than 100 years ago. Some of our great corporations have roots in Asia of more than a century. I am very aware that for much of humanity's existence, Asia has been at its center. It has been a leader in commerce, governance, science, literature, and the arts. Whenever there is spare time in my schedule, I always try and make a point of going to at least one cultural or historic site visit. I've come to develop a real appreciation for Asian art in particular. Last week in Beijing, I toured some of the museums in the Forbidden City, looking at ceramics that were many centuries, even millennia old, yet still relatively modern in the context of its ancient civilization. But that's what's changed in the 21st century compared to the 16th and earlier, is that we are no longer a planet of largely disconnected regions. The world of tall ships, feudal courts, distant frontiers, and the occasional invasion has given way to instant communications, universal brands, and multinational companies. In this hyper-connected world, a prosperous Asia means a more prosperous world. What happens in Asia is now instantly felt across the globe. That means that that means we not only have a stake in Asia's prosperity, but also in its peace, in its security, and in its governance. Canada's traditional trading partners have naturally involved the United States and Europe. We now know that we must diversify these economic relationships, and we know that trading relationships don't happen in isolation from political and security engagement. We can look to our friendship with Singapore as the benchmark for this level of engagement. Next year, we will celebrate 50 years of diplomatic relations between our countries, a magnet for over $2 billion in Canadian direct investment and a key ally on regional security. Canada, too, is a gateway to North America for Singapore. Many of Singapore's economic and government leaders have studied there, and it invests more in Canada than any other Southeast Asian nation. I'm looking forward to meeting my counterpart later today to discuss how we can maintain this momentum. I believe that what Canada has to offer meshes neatly with the changing needs of transformed Asian societies. We have world-class companies keen to deepen partnerships throughout this very important and dynamic region. We are, of course, also engaged with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. At the same time, we have just completed negotiations for a free trade agreement with Korea and are actively negotiating with others, including Japan and India. We have the unique advantage of not just only being a bridge from Asia to North America under NAFTA, but now also to Europe with a huge Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, a trade agreement that is so dynamic and so aggressive that we will see the elimination of 98% of tariffs between Canada and Europe on day one of this agreement coming into force. So I think Canada and Asia's closeness, geographically, historically, demographically, economically. But I believe that collective need for this engagement comes from external reasons just as much as internal. In the coming years, it will be a constant challenge for Asia to keep its balance in an increasingly unstable world. When we met last week, my Chinese counterpart said he believed that the world is now systematically unstable, and he was quoting our former British counterpart, William Hague. An inordinate number of column inches and web pixels have been dedicated to the rise of Asian economies and the world's increasing dependence on them. What I don't think we hear enough about is the growing dependence and even vulnerability this creates for those Asian nations here. I began the speech by showing off about how much time I've spent in Southeast Asia in recent years. But I have to admit that there is one other region that has just as many plane tickets with my name on it, and that is the Middle East. It is a priority for obvious reasons. In a hyper-connected world, instability in places like Iraq and Syria can have a direct impact on the stability of places like Indonesia and Singapore. For example, when ISIS began to roll across Iraq, oil prices surged and Asian stock prices fell. So just as transforming Asian nations have evolving economic needs, I believe they have evolving diplomatic needs too. Growing economies and stature on the world stage should bring with it growing responsibilities beyond domestic and regional borders. This is already happening to some extent. In my bilateral meetings last week in China and Japan, we spent as much time talking about global issues like Ukraine and Gaza as we did about bilateral issues. Canada has spread itself out as an outward-facing, openly trading nation. We have a long-standing interest and, yes, sensitivity to global issues. But if that is a problem, we are also a major part of the solution. I believe there are 3 strategic areas through Canada can make a meaningful contribution to the stability here in Asia: governance, energy security, and security cooperation. Let me start with governance and democratic development. Stability has in the past been a watchword for autocrats who seek to justify their top-down control. But we know that this is a superficial stability, certainly in the medium to long term. My friend, the foreign policy commentator, Ian Bremmer, describes this well with the J-curve concept, that the most stable countries are those that are open and are democratic. I'd have to say, after a seemingly inevitable march of democracy in the latter decades of the last century, it often feels like progress has stalled over the past decade. Fortunately, some of the great democratic success stories of the last generation are found right here in Asia: Korea, Japan, Mongolia. I'm optimistic about a fresh era in Indonesia following the historic elections last month. This evening in Jakarta, I have the honor of being the first foreign representative to meet with the new president-elect. So I'm very much looking forward to that engagement. India's recent election was also breathtaking in its sheer size, its scope, and its complexity. But there are clearly also continuing challenges in this important region. In some cases, democratic practices are sliding backwards and reforms have stalled. Vietnam's restrictions on bloggers, Thailand's military coup, and Sri Lankan's oppression of its Tamil minority. Pakistan's vibrant civil society under attack by extremists, often empowered by deep state actors. And probably worst of all, North Korea's insistence on remaining in its democratic and moral darkness. This darkness is quite literal too. If you look at nighttime satellite images of the region, there is a North Korea-shaped black hole next to the bright lights of South Korea and its other neighbors. We, of course, need to understand that democratic development takes time. Cultivating a culture of democracy involves entire societies, the old and the young, the rich and the poor. To not do so risks nations being held back, individually, but also the region as a whole. Societies which fail to develop democratic checks and balances, transparency and accountability, and freedom of expression contribute to instability and contribute to risks of conflict. Just look at Russia. The decline of the Russian Federation's democratic space in recent years has contributed to a leader increasingly isolated from reality and isolated even from his own people. This has resulted in an aggressive foreign policy, to reckless actions, delusional justifications, and an economy that is in a tailspin. Russia's illegal invasion and annexation of Crimea was a throwback to 19th century practices, and its dangerous provocations in eastern Ukraine resulted in the shocking downing of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17. Successful and enduring societies of the 21st century are not built on strongman and secrecy. They are rooted in democratic norms and standards, in independent institutions, the rule of law, and accountable representative government. Democracy is not just about elections. This is something I often come back to. And democracy takes work, and those governing as well as the governed. It's a journey, not a destination. Canada is very committed to working together with our Asian friends and our partners to ensure that this region continues to move forward as a region of democracies. The people of Asia and the people of the entire world will benefit from this. The second strategic area that I'd like to highlight is energy security. Most energy demand will take place here in Asia, with China and India alone accounting for half of that growth. In a time of global concern about risks and energy supply, the world is looking to Canada as a stable, reliable, resource-rich partner. We have been blessed with enough resources to become an energy superpower. It's not well known that Canada has the world's third largest proven oil reserves, for just one example. Asia needs more energy, reliable energy, and Canada is a natural supplier. But we have work to do. Canada is committed to expanding our infrastructure, to bringing that energy to market. Energy has the potential, in my judgment, to really transform our relationship with Asia. We've gone from 3 million barrels a day just a few years ago to 3.6 this year. We'll soon be at 4, then 5, and have the capacity to get to 7 million barrels a day. It is up to all parties involved to make that happen, and is in our collective interest to do so. Third, and not entirely unrelated to energy security, I believe is the need for security cooperation. The number of security fault lines and tripwires in Asia are multiplying. It's becoming widely recognized that more must be done through the institutions of the region to deter, to manage, and to respond to these security tensions. Canada is, naturally, deeply concerned by the rise in tensions surrounding maritime boundary disputes throughout the region. We don't choose sides in maritime boundary disputes. We even have a couple of our own, but we deal with them peacefully. We do, however, call on nations of the region to refrain from provocative actions, to commit to peaceful solutions, and to strengthen the institutional and norms which underpin regional stability. The stakes are too high to fail. Canada is prepared to do its part to help strengthen peace, security, and stability here in Asia. Canada has a long and proud tradition of involvement in Asian security. I believe that Canada can continue to make a difference in areas of defense and security of priority to the region, and where Canada can really add value. Not just maritime security, but areas like cybersecurity and counterterrorism capacity building. A key vehicle for our support is ASEAN. We see ASEAN as a vitally important institution in this region and welcome its work with China towards establishing a code of conduct in the South China Sea. We urge all countries of the region to embrace such a code. While in Jakarta tomorrow, I will be meeting with ASEAN's Secretary General, and I can announce today that Canada is committing additional funds, building on the $30 million that I announced last year in Brunei, to enhance security cooperation in ASEAN. This funding will help tackle non-traditional security threats such as trafficking and radicalization. I'd also add that Canada believes that the East Asia Summit has the potential to play a much greater role. We have already signaled our willingness to join the EAS as soon as it is ready to expand its membership. And we are encouraged by the strong support Canada's candidacy has received from across the region. If we get them right, increased democratic development, energy security, and security cooperation can be the pillars of stability in this important region. A secure, stable world is something we should all care about as a value in itself. But seeking it isn't about liberal internationalism or being an altruistic global citizen. The cold, hard economic facts demand it too. Prosperity is inextricable from stability and security. You can't maximize the potential of a country when its people's needs aren't being satisfied by responsible, responsive governance. You can't have a free flow of crucial resources like LNG when a key maritime area such as the South China Sea is bubbling with tensions. You can't have a sustainable reliance on certain Middle Eastern sources when a clerical regime in Iran threatens to start a new nuclear arms race in the Middle East. You can't have open trade when it's necessary to take actions like sanctioning the Russian Federation over its provocations in Ukraine. And frankly, you can't have a prosperous air industry bringing the world together when planes are being indiscriminately shot out of the sky. As I conclude, I'd like to reaffirm that on all of these themes I've been discussing here this morning, Canada's engagement is particularly strong with Singapore. This strength comes from the bonds of common values, joint interests, and a commitment to work together in advancing them. I'd also add that this strength comes from my personal connection with my Singaporean counterpart, whose advice I've come to greatly value. I want this to be reflective of our relationship with the rest of the Asia-Pacific region. Canada's common interest in the region's peace, prosperity, and role in global affairs is clear. We have deep roots here, and I have tried to explain today, I firmly believe that both Canada and the countries of this dynamic region can and will benefit from deepening them even further. We have an unprecedented opportunity to do so, but it won't come about without energetic and strategic leadership. Let's seize this opportunity today. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister, for your extremely strong speech, in which you particularly focused on Canada's interests and policies in this part of the world, in the Asia-Pacific region. I was particularly struck by your emphasis on the crucial relationship between, on the one hand, democratic development, and on the other hand, security and stability, and also by your important points about Canada's potential role as an energy superpower, as you put it, and also on the clear need for stronger security cooperation in this region in light of the clear and increasingly evident threats to stability in the Asia-Pacific. We now have a short while for questions, and I'd ask those in the audience who'd like to ask a question of the Minister to please raise your hand. Stay in your seat. The microphone will come to you. And when you have the microphone, if you could please say who you are and what your affiliation is, and also ask your question as briefly as possible with a question mark at the end rather than making a statement. Thank you very much.
In the Canadian Parliament, we have question period, 45 minutes a day, and this never happens, so there's no question.
Sir.
Hello. Good morning, Mr. John Baird. My name is Howard. I'm the director of an art gallery, Datang Fine Arts. Welcome to Singapore. In fact, I have made a very strong friendship with a Canadian who I did not know 2 years ago because he was being stuck here in Singapore because he married his wife in Philippines, and they have getting the Canadian government to validate her identity. So I'd like to share 2 areas. One is from a micro level, my personal experience, and also from a macro level at the government's suggestion. So actually, this friend of mine, his name is Patrick.
Excuse me, could you keep your question? Could you make your point briefly and ask a question? Sorry to interrupt, but there isn't really time for long statements.
Sure.
Thank you.
So I believe that the Canadian government has security measures to prevent people who forge identity. Perhaps can look into the areas where actually the Singapore government and the Canadian government can streamline this process, especially if the person married outside Canada. Secondly, Singapore also celebrates 50th anniversary next year, our 50 years of independence. I would like to see there a stronger relationship between Singapore and Canada. And also, incidentally, in 1996, when the president of the ICAO came to Singapore, a piece of painting representing the flag of freedom was presented to the HQ of the ICAO in Montreal. So I look forward to be a blessing to your country in providing the experience of Asian art in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll certainly take that back. We have done a lot in Canada on identity, on human trafficking and security cooperation in the region, which has been incredibly important. It relates to the first part of what you said. And the relationship with Singapore is very strong. Singapore is Canada's dialogue partner with ASEAN. And we have really sought in the last 5 or 6 years to really strengthen our relationship, not just with the members of ASEAN, but with ASEAN as an institution. We think it's tremendously important part of the regional architecture and a very important forum for dialogue with its partners.
Thank you very much, Minister. Sir.
Mr. Minister, thank you very much. I'm Tormod Andresen, the Ambassador of Norway. And I was heartened by your strong message on democracy and stability. And, you know, coming from where I'm coming from, I couldn't agree more in a way. On the other hand, having served in China and then in Singapore, you cannot help but understanding when people look toward Western market economies, Western democracies, they see systems that in many respects fail to deliver in face with economic and political crisis. So my question would be, how do we repackage the way we describe democratic values and democratic systems to make them even today more attractive for people from this part of the world?
Sure.
Thank you.
I think even more important than democracy is freedom. One of the great things in Canada we also enjoy is pluralism, the rule of law, stability, security, prosperity. These are all important values, and again, it's a voyage, not a destination. I do think there are many areas in the region where Canada is deeply concerned. The issue of religious freedom, where you have a Catholic clergy being forced underground, the issue of stifling of political dissent, censorship of the internet. So these are all important values that we've got to promote, and we try to do our very best. And we always obviously have to work with like-minded partners, and Canada obviously has a great partner in Norway in pushing these values. People often ask, what does your job entail? And I say that I have two responsibilities. One is to promote Canadian interests, and the other is to promote Canadian values. And obviously, freedom, pluralism are at the heart of those.
Thank you, Minister. Ambassador Pavlo Soltansky from Ukraine.
Thank you, Dean. Minister, I'll also use this opportunity to make a brief statement. Canada was the first to recognize Ukrainian independence in '91. Now, when Ukraine is fighting for independence, once again, Canada is one of those supporting us in a huge scope. This was my statement and my question. You did not mention that presently the whole system of security in the world is undermined unprecedentedly. So, just a few words. The vision, the prospects of new world security system. Thank you.
Yeah. I like the old world security system. It is unacceptable that in 2014, one leader in the Kremlin can think they can redraw the borders of Europe. And that cannot stand. We can never recognize that, and Canada's taken a very strong view that we must forcefully confront it. And this constant looking at the bottom line and the economic impact, listen, freedom has a price as well. We saw what happened with the invasion, the annexation of Crimea, and we've seen the material support that the Russian Federation has given to the rebels in eastern Ukraine. And this is not a suspicion or a thought. I mean, this is a fact. I don't believe that the Kremlin has command and control on the ground, but you don't buy these type of weapon systems at Walmart. It's clear where it's coming from. And we must hold the Russian Federation to account for these type of provocative actions. If they can act with impunity, it sends an awfully bad message to other actors in the world with perhaps less than noble intentions. And we've been very strong and forceful in calling for sanctions, meaningful sanctions. We have a challenge in the world, is people are used to immediate gratification. I was at a bank machine the other day and I had to wait 10 seconds before the money came out. In Canada, people go through drive-through coffee shops to get their coffee and never even have to get out of their car. And if they have to wait more than a minute, they get angry. The sanctions obviously aren't working in a day or in a week or in a month, but we've got to continually reinforce them, expand them. They're not having much of a micro effect, but the macro effect has been significant. The instability of the ruble, the huge capital flight from the Russian Federation, and a decline in economic growth, even perhaps pushing them into recession. So in our judgment, we've got to keep our foot on the gas and keep focused on this. And all of us, in my judgment, we look at Canada, the United States, and Europe, we've all got to take some pain for long-term gain. And this business of one country saying, well, financial sanctions are really important, and then the other country saying, well, defense sanctions are more important. Let's all take some cumulative pain. But I think this is a very bad precedent that we've seen, and it's a huge challenge to peace and security in the world. And today it might be manifesting itself in eastern Ukraine. It already has in Crimea, it already has in East Transnistria, it already has in South Ossetia, and I think we have to do more to confront it. And we've been really forward-leaning on this, aligning ourselves with Poland, with Sweden, the Baltic states. We're now pleased to see others are getting stronger on it. It's regrettable that it took the murder of 296 people at 35,000 feet to get more sanctions.
Sir.
Good morning. My name is Joseph, Director of Alpha and Omega Consultants in Singapore. Minister, you referred to three things in your talk: the democracy, the security, and energy, and frequently referred to many countries, especially to India a few times. So I'd like to ask you a question related to India, primarily because we have a new Prime Minister, and you emphasized about the scope and complexity of the country, both domestically and internationally. Recently, he had a visit to BRICS, and they talked about the BRICS Bank, Development Bank. And then secondly, he had also opening a bank, which is the SAARC, the South Asian Association of Countries. 8 countries are there. So they're talking about a new bank in order to, as a counterweight for the World Bank and IMF. So my question would be related to India being a Commonwealth member and Canada being a Commonwealth member. Is there a possibility of a Commonwealth Development Bank in future? And secondly, regarding the ongoing WTO debate and disagreement, the agreement has been kind of derailed or delayed because India objected to some of the terms. So as a foreign minister, from a point of international relations, how is it going to affect the diplomatic relations of India with other countries?
Sure. Okay. I think it would be a bit ambitious for a Commonwealth Development Bank. The Commonwealth has struggled, to, in my judgment, to even meet its existing mandate on Commonwealth values. And the notion that the chair in office in the Commonwealth Summit was, in Sri Lanka with its no independent investigation into war crimes or accountability, ongoing authoritarian trend of the government there, and a complete lack of reconciliation with the Tamil minority, I think has been a discredit to the Commonwealth. India, I admired Prime Minister Singh's decision to join Prime Minister Harper in not attending that Leaders' Summit. But we'd be very keen on using other vehicles. I think India, with the BRIC countries, I think India has a lot more in common with Europe and Canada, the United States, than it does with other members of the BRICS. We're very keen, in the absence of an international trade agreement, we're very keen on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We also have bilateral trade negotiations going with India. We're very keen on it. We have huge Indian diaspora in Canada. We have 2 ministers in our government, Sikhs of Indian heritage. And we are, my own parliamentary secretary is Hindu and from Indian heritage as well. So we're very keen to bilaterally expand the relationship with India. We're excited about the energy and promise of the new government. Mr. Modi has been a friend to Canada when he was in Gujarat, and we were not a country who had a problem giving him a visa.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. In the front there.
We can take a few more if you want.
You're happy to do a few more?
Thank you. My name is Caroline Brassard from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. I would like to ask you a question about another type of security risk that is really at the forefront of the Asia-Pacific region, which is natural disasters. I believe that it overarches at least 2 of the 3 priority areas that you have mentioned. One is governance, and the other, of course, is security. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about the next steps for Canada to help address, mitigate the risk of natural disasters that pose great security threats to the Asia Pacific?
Sure.
Thank you.
This is a huge challenge, and Canada has played a big part, whether it's in the recent problems in the Philippines or with other natural disasters in recent time. I think this has been a priority for a lot of the regional architecture. We put financial resources into supporting capacity building and are certainly prepared to do more. Obviously, this should be led by the region, but supported by the international community. Obviously, it's a huge security threat, and I don't think this is likely to decline in the future. It's likely to become more acute, and resilience and capacity building are important. Canada has and will continue to be very supportive of that.
The Minister has kindly agreed to take a few more questions, so we can continue with the questions and answers for a little bit. Yes, sir. You. Yeah.
Francesco Vancini from the International Peace Institute. Good morning. The recent anniversary of World War I has brought some experts to draw some parallels between the world before World War I and the world of today. Where do you stand on that debate? Are you concerned about where we're going, or overall an optimist?
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more. The instability and the parallels are real and significant. Canada's very pleased to, this wasn't a setup question, Canada's very pleased to partner with the IPI on a conference being held later this month in Salzburg to discuss and confront those exact challenges. The instability that we're seeing is profound, and the parallels are in my mind, are in many cases are very profound. So we'll be discussing this in Salzburg in a few weeks, and we're very pleased to be a big supporter of that with Norway.
I should take one from this side for a change. Lady at the back there.
Hi, Your Excellency. People have a view of politicians as being somewhat, unsavory, perhaps. How do you...
Who? Name one person.
It's certainly
What's your name?
Certainly not directed at you or anyone. But I'm just wondering how you reconcile that with, collaborating with the people in your party. Because you need trust to get great work done in any kind of team environment in the world today, in any sector. So how do you dance with wolves, basically?
How have you?
Sorry, we couldn't hear.
How do you dance with wolves?
And sorry, but could you
Next
say who
question.
you are? Who are you?
No, I'm just teasing.
I'm a social entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Canada and the United States would probably be very similar, is that public attitudes towards politicians are probably akin to used car salesmen. Having said that, most people choose to re-elect their own politicians, so at the macro level, maybe a lot of problems, less so at the micro level. Certainly as foreign minister, the one thing I've learned, establishing relationships, not just with like-mindeds, but with people from different backgrounds and different parts of the world, and perhaps with different perspectives, is a tremendously important part of effectively tackling challenges. And that's certainly something I strongly believe in. People's attitudes towards the political process and political actors, I guess that's one of the byproducts of a democratic society, that people are free to have those views. In Canada, we say sometimes it's the only politics is the only business where you say nice things about people behind their backs, but to their face you're really nasty.
You'd like to take one or two more? Just here. Just here. No, microphone's here.
Okay, thank you. Morning, Minister. I'm John. I spent about 10 years studying and working in Canada. I used to live on the street that is Ottawa, but 10 steps away on the other side of the street is Nepean. Okay, I I'm glad that you mentioned three little words in your whole delivery, rule of law. But take it aside. I want to ask a very specific question. You mentioned about possible relationship in terms of energy security between Canada and Asia. So I'm a very selfish person. How can Singapore get more engaged in that plan? In terms of, because, we have zero drop of oil and gas, and you have plentiful in your backyard. Now, is there any role can play in bridging what you have and what Asia needs?
Well, one big area is capital, is investment in our natural resources sector. We've gone from 3 million barrels a day just a few short years ago to 3.6. We should get to 4 million barrels a day in the next 2 years, 5 million barrels a day by 2030, and we have the capacity to get to 7. We have huge capacities for LNG, and none of these have any export controls. So we've gone from seeing the United States as being our biggest customer, our only customer, to now being our biggest competitor. So our challenge is market access, and that requires good government public policy. We brought in new rules that have seen the expeditious consideration of these projects in as short as 18 months. There's a significant amount of capital required on pipelines, LNG terminals, et cetera. But there's tremendous market opportunities there for investment. But such a small amount, I mean, the Norwegian ambassadors here, such a small amount of the world's oil is from stable, liberal, democratic, open economies. And that's tremendously important in Canada. That's what Canada has to deliver. And if you look at the move away from nuclear, the combined cycle natural gas in Japan, you look at the significant economic growth in the Republic of Korea, if you look at China, the entire region, I think Canada can play a very important part in that, of the meeting Asia's energy security. And if you look at the challenges in Iran, in Iraq, versus the challenges in Canada, who would you like to be buying oil from? Which would be most reliable, which would be most stable in the long term? And the one big benefit, obviously, we have in Canada is we've got so much more than we could possibly ever use ourselves. So market access to the Pacific Coast is not a matter of importance for energy producers. It's a national, it's an issue of our national prosperity and an issue of national importance. So we put a great deal of priority on it.
Final question, gentleman at the back in the blue shirt.
Thank you, Minister. I'm Fabian, ex-Dalhousian, was in Canada for 5 years. Just two quick questions. Number one, we know that Obama is pulling out troops from Afghanistan in 2016. Canada has lost a lot of soldiers there. How does Canada see the situation panning out in Afghanistan? And another question closer to home in Alberta. What do you say to people who complain that the tar sands is very energy intensive and destroy vast tracts of Canadian forest?
Sure. I'll talk about the oil first. The oil sands are an important part of Canada's economy. The industry has made extraordinary environmental progress on reducing the amount of water. The government has upped its water monitoring regime, air emissions regime. The practice has become a lot less energy intensive. Reclamation happens and is very effective. There's also new technology on in situ, which doesn't require open pit mining. But I can tell you that the progress is real, substantial, and improves every year. So we think it's positive and a huge part of the energy security needs of the Asia Pacific region. Your first question was?
Afghanistan.
Oh, Afghanistan. We paid a huge toll. We lost 158 lives in Afghanistan, which in proportion to our population, the troops there is one of the highest. Obviously, it was fundamentally about our NATO obligation when one member is attacked. We feel very strongly about that. The Canadian combat mission ended 3 years ago, and then our 1,000-person training mission ended in March. Afghanistan remains, I think, our top priority for development assistance, and Canada has matched the United Kingdom's $110 million a year contribution to the Afghanistan Security Task Force. Obviously, we're following very closely the process of resolving the election results, and that is obviously going to be central. Combating corruption and the security situation in Kabul and other parts of the country will remain a big priority. This won't be easy. Afghanistan hasn't had an easy past, and its future will continue to be, but obviously we have to stay engaged, and Canada's done our part militarily, and we'll obviously be there financially with the trust fund and through development support. What's going on in Afghanistan, when you look at what's happening with ISIS in Iraq, we barely even discuss Syria, which is the worst humanitarian disaster in this century. What's going on in eastern Ukraine, what's going on in Gaza, obviously is a tremendously challenging time in many parts of the world.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think we need to bring this session to a close now, but let me thank you again for your really excellent Fullerton Lecture, and also for your very frank answers and full answers to the good range of questions that we had from our audience. I think what came across for me particularly strongly from your lecture and your responses to the questions today was the importance of values as well as interests in Canada's foreign policy, and the extent to which there is a real seriousness and drive behind your various initiatives in the Asia-Pacific region while maintaining your concurrent emphasis on the Middle East and also on Europe. You've given our large audience in the Fullerton Hotel here today the chance to hear your perspective on these important challenges for Canada in its foreign policy in this region and more widely. Thank you for making the time to deliver this lecture and for answering the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.